Hi guys, it's Sandy with Sandy Cogdill Designs, and I am back today with another Halloween card. Surprise, surprise. I just love making Halloween cards. It is truly my favorite holiday to make cards for. This particular card is made with stamps and dies from Trinity Stamps. And of course, I had to include one of their adorable little gnomes. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. You can follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, www.sandycogdilldesigns.com. All right, let's get started making this fun little shaker card. To create the shaker element of this card, I used the half pint jar stamp and coordinating die set. I stamped the jar image on one piece of cardstock, and then I cut out a jar shape using the whole jar die and drew a little line on it where I wanted the jam to end in my jar. What I'm doing with this is I'm making a mask because I'm going to be using my Copic airbrush system to get the coloring in on this jar. So I need a mask to cover the top part of the jar, and then I need a little mask to cover the lower part of the jar. I used B00 to color the top part of the jar, and then on the lower part of the jar, I used a combination of YG06 and YG07 to color the spooky jam that's in the in the jar. As you can see, I put a little bit of temporary adhesive on the back of those little masking pieces to hold them in place because the airbrush system does have a little bit of air that comes out. And I also use a little spatula to hold down the different edges of the card just to make sure I don't get any overspray on them. If you haven't used a Copic airbrush system and you want to try something fun and something new, I think it's really fun to play with. I like using it with the Copic colors because the colors are so bold and vivid. Plus, you could use any marker in your Copic collection to get the color that you want. Now that I have my jar completely colored the way I want it to, I'm going to go ahead and use the die that cuts out the jar so that it's a shaker element. I'll go ahead and tape that down to my cardstock, run it through my die cut machine, and then I will set aside the jar piece and save the inside of the jar for the inside of my shaker, if that makes any sense at all. My preferred way of making a shaker card is to let the dies do most of the work for me. I find it's much easier than trying to shape foam pieces of tape around where I want the shaker elements to be. So if I've got something that's got a lot of curves or a definite shape to it, I will just use the part of the die that cuts out the shaker part and just cut out about 6 to 8 layers, depending on how thick my cardstock is. And then I will just adhere them either directly to the card. This particular card, I just went ahead and cut out the jar shape, the full solid jar shape, and then used the shaker dies to start building the little well where my elements are going to go in. I will also put in the piece that I cut out of the colored jar because I want that as the background to my shaker piece. Now that I have my shaker well built, I want to put some fun little things on the inside of the shaker card. So I am going to use the Scream and Sugar mug add-on set, and I'm going to cut out what I think are bubbles. They could be brains, but I'm not quite sure. Of course, that would be very, very spooky. And I'm going to go ahead and use my airbrush again with some V05 ink color. I'm going to get those sprayed, and then I'm going to go back in with some Villainous Potion Distress Oxide ink and just dust those edges and the center part of those little pieces to give them just a little bit more dimension. Now that I have my 3 bubbly brain pieces, I want to layer the 3 of them just to give me a little bit more dimension inside that jar. I also want to be able to tuck in either eyeballs or worms in those 3 pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tape them together, and then I'm going to use the die to cut out the 3 pieces so that they fit really nicely in that opening of the shaker well. See how nicely that fits in that opening? Now I was careful not to glue the top edges of my bubble brains, or the brain bubbles, because that's what I'm calling them now, to make sure that I am able to tuck in some little eyeballs and some worms. So the eyeballs are cut from the Screamin' Sugar mug add-on, and I just used the smaller eyeball. I tried putting in the larger one, and it was just too big. The little worms are from the Pumpkin Candy Bucket die set, and those I just cut from yellow cardstock. I didn't do anything special with them, but I just kind of tuck them into those little areas, and that just creates such a fun little background for my shaker pieces. Okay, I've got my brain bubbles, my eyeballs, my worms, my little shaker bits, all sprinkled in or glued in the middle of my card. So I'm going to cut out a piece of acetate using the solid jar die set, and I'm going to use liquid glue to seal that up. Then I'm going to use that piece that I stamped initially and used my Copic spray marker, my Copic airbrush system on. I'll go ahead and glue that on top of that shaker piece also. I've cut some bats using the Oh So Spooky die set. That's the one with the little gnome couple that is just adorable. I've cut some large and some small bats out of black cardstock. And then I've taken some very thin strips of acetate and I'm just gluing them on the back of my bats. I'm not too worried about how long those pieces of acetate are, because I'm going to cut and adjust them as I get ready to insert them into the top of my jar. In order to get these bats coming out of the top of my jar, I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to slide it in between some of the cardstock layers, just making an opening large enough where I can slide that piece of acetate in. And I'm just going to play around with those where I want them to be coming out of the card. And I'm also using my glass surface because it's got the A2 card kind of marked out there to kind of give me an idea of where I want those bats to come out of, so that once I'm done, they're not extending out past my card. I want them to stay in that A2 size. To create the background for my little shaker piece, I inked up a piece of white cardstock with carved pumpkin distress oxide ink. And then I used the stencil, it's called the Halftone texture, to go ahead and just give that background just a little bit more interest and dimension. And I'm not using a different color, I'm using the same color, I'm just using a heavier application of it. I've cut down my stenciled background to 4 by 5 1/4 and I've adhered it to my card base. The card base is 8.5 by 5.25 and scored at 5.5. I'm sorry, 8.5 by 5.5, and it's scored at 4.25. Next, I'm going to go ahead and glue down my little shaker element so that my bats are falling just to the top edge of that card. I couldn't quite find the word combination that I wanted for this particular card. I wanted "you're the" and "in my jam," but I definitely couldn't find "in my jam." So what I did was I just did a little bit of creative stamping and masking using the stamp set called "This Calls for a Toast," and I made my own little sentiment banners. The word spooky is from the Spooky Cut and Foil die set, and I just cut that out of black and orange cardstock. I'll go ahead and glue that onto the top of my jar, and then my little sentiment, the bottom one that says "to my jam," I do put a little thin foam square on the back just so that it has a little bit of support underneath it from where it's attached at the side of the jar to where it connects to the acetate of the card. I had initially thought this was going to be the end of this card, but the more I looked at it, I felt like the bottom part was just missing a little bit of something. So I went to my stash and I dug out one of my little gnomes. It's called Fabulous Gnome. And I had some that were colored from another project, and I decided that he would be really, really cute at that bottom corner of my card. So I went ahead and I adhered him to that. This is all, of course, off camera. And then I just added a few sparkles to the upper corner, the lower corner, and in a few spots on the background, just to kind of tie in the shaker pieces of that are on the inside of the shaker. That pretty much does it for this particular card. I think it is just adorable. I think it's so fun to have those little bats coming out of the top of the jar. And if you kind of give them just a little bit of a fold forward, it even helps them stand out just a little bit more. Okay, that is it. Go ahead. Again, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. You can subscribe to get notified of future videos. Follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, sandycogdilldesigns.com. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a happy Halloween. Bye-bye.